Hi, everyone. This is Aaron, and welcome to our Sola Network podcast. In this episode, we're going to hear from Pastor Hanley Liu, English lead pastor of First Chinese Baptist Church of Walnut. As a member of our Sola Council, we asked him to share some words for churches and leaders during the coronavirus crisis. Thanks for listening.
COVID-19 really hits at the core of the curse of the fall, and it hits at the core of the human condition. Because unlike any other disease, when you test positive, you not only fear death, especially for those who are susceptible, but you are immediately put into quarantine. So there's one. I think most people will admit that there's some fear of dying, but dying in isolation is completely different from cancer or any other disease. So I think this is what a lot of people, especially those who don't have Christ, are fearing. You're not in the hospital room surrounded by your family members or your loved ones. Instead, you may be surrounded by medical professionals kind of shielding themselves from you. You know, they're in protective gear, God willing, if they have it, so that they don't contract what you have. And so it is the amplification of the curse, but at the same time, it totally reveals our greatest hope and our greatest need. And I think that is what we as Christ followers, the saving message that we have. And now we have to do whatever we can, as I think, as pastors, as spiritual leaders, to get that message out to our people. Because on the cross, I think some of you might say this as well, because I've heard it from you in your preaching. But on the cross, I mean, Christ was completely abandoned. I mean, he was abandoned by his friends. Father turned away temporarily, and he bore that grief. He bore isolation, and in doing so, he defeated disease. He defeated death completely. And Colossians 3 verses 1-5 talks about how we have that hidden life of Christ. That even though we can't see that security, that safety of what we were created for this safety because of the eternal fellowship that we would share with the triune God. And once that was severed by sin, that's the effect. And so disease is one of the effects. And when we look throughout Scripture, it is kind of heart-wrenching, I think, for us as pastors. I mean, you look at the Old Testament, and I don't have an exact percentage, but I want to say over 90% of God is God of disease or trouble is God's judgment. And the people who are close to Him, basically, they know. The prophets like Lamentations, Jeremiah, Amos, Habakkuk, they know that it's His judgment, and they cry out to Him. And I don't think we would go out there and say, okay, this is COVID, is God's judgment. But I think the reality is, then what message do we have? And God, with the exception of Noah, God doesn't really remove His people from worldly calamity. He allows them to go through it. Only He stays connected with them. He tells them what's going on. And same thing in the New Testament, with suffering and persecution. God doesn't remove His people out of the world. He tells them that He is with them through the Spirit. And I think this is a season where I don't think any of us have the answers, but there's got to be a way that we teach our people to go deep into God's word so that they really grow in their union with Christ. And again, it's the cross and it's the gospel that really gives us the freedom from the two things that I think we fear the most,